The blood-stained letter trembled in Hannah Parker's hands as she stood before the ruins of her life. The ashes of her husband's general store still smoldering in the cool, spring air of 1878. White Rock, Colorado wasn't supposed to end this way for her, a 24-year-old widow with nothing but accusations hanging over her head and nowhere to call home. "Mrs. Parker, I'm afraid the bank cannot extend any further credit," Mr. Williams, the bank manager, had informed her that morning, his spectacles glinting in the sunlight as he avoided meeting her eyes. "Given the circumstances of your husband's passing and the outstanding debts, we must foreclose on all remaining property." Hannah knew what he wouldn't say aloud. The whispers had spread through town like wildfire that her husband Jacob had taken his own life after discovering her alleged affair with the blacksmith's son. It was a vicious lie, born from small-town jealousy and her husband's business rival, but the truth mattered little now. Jacob had died in the fire that consumed their store and home, leaving nothing but debt and scandal in his wake. As dusk settled over the rolling hills surrounding White Rock, Hannah made her decision. With only a small carpet bag containing her meager possessions, a few clothes, her wedding band, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the last of her money, she slipped away from town. The Caldwell Ranch lay 3 miles outside White Rock, abandoned for the winter while the old rancher visited his daughter in Denver. She'd helped Mrs. Caldwell with canning last autumn and knew the barn would provide temporary shelter until she could formulate a plan. The night air cut through her thin shawl as she trudged along the dirt road, jumping at every sound. When the silhouette of the Caldwell barn finally loomed against the starry sky, Hannah nearly wept with relief. She slipped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and livestock. A ladder led to the hayloft above, and with trembling limbs, she climbed upward. The hayloft was dry and warm, the sweet smell of hay enveloping her as she created a small nest for herself in the corner, far from the entrance. Tomorrow she would think about her future, perhaps travel to Denver or Colorado Springs, where no one knew her name or the shame that now followed it. For tonight, exhaustion claimed her as she pulled her shawl tightly around her shoulders and surrendered to sleep. Owen Tucker rode through the darkness with purpose, his horse's steady gait eating up the miles as they approached the Caldwell property. At 32, Owen had spent the last 15 years working ranches across the West, finally saving enough to purchase his own piece of land. Old man Caldwell had agreed to sell him the ranch, and Owen had arranged to arrive early to assess the property and prepare for spring cattle driving. The Caldwell ranch house appeared dark as expected, but a flicker of movement near the barn caught his attention. Bandits and drifters were common enough in these parts, and Owen's hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he approached cautiously. Securing his horse outside, Owen entered the barn silently, lantern held low. Nothing seemed disturbed on the ground floor. As he turned to leave, a soft sound from above made him freeze. Drawing his pistol, he quietly ascended the ladder to the hayloft. The sight that greeted him was unexpected: a woman sleeping fitfully in the hay, her face streaked with tear tracks and dirt, clutching a small bag to her chest. Owen recognized her immediately. Hannah Parker, the general store owner's wife. News traveled fast in these parts, and he'd heard of Jacob Parker's death and the fire while passing through a neighboring town. He holstered his weapon and cleared his throat. "Mrs. Parker." Hannah bolted upright, terror flashing across her face as she scrambled backward. "Please," she gasped, "I mean no harm, I just needed shelter for the night." Owen raised his hands to show he meant no threat. "It's all right, madam, I'm Owen Tucker. I've purchased this ranch from Mr. Caldwell." Recognition dawned in her eyes. She'd seen him in the store a few times before, a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes who'd recently moved to the area. "Mr. Tucker, I apologize for trespassing. I'll leave immediately." As she attempted to gather her things, Owen noticed her shivering in the cool night air. Mrs. Parker, there's no need to rush off. It's the middle of the night and it's not safe for a woman to be traveling alone. Hannah's chin lifted, a flash of pride breaking through her desperation. I have no choice, Mr. Tucker. I cannot return to Whiterock. Owen nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. Small towns could be merciless with their judgments. You can have my bed, he said simply. I'll take the spare room. At least until morning when we can figure something else out. Hannah stared at him, searching for deception or ulterior motives, but found only genuine concern. Why would you help me? You must have heard the stories. I've learned not to put much stock in gossip, Mrs. Parker. And I know what it's like to need shelter when the world turns against you. He extended his hand toward the ladder. Please, it's warm in the house and I've got food. After a moment's hesitation, Hannah nodded and gathered her small bag. What choice did she have? The alternative was continuing into the night with nowhere to go. The ranch house was modest but clean, with simple furniture and a large stone fireplace. Owen quickly built a fire while Hannah stood awkwardly in the doorway, still clutching her bag. I'll heat some coffee and stew, he said, moving to the kitchen area. You look like you could use a hot meal. Hannah hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma of reheated stew filled the small house. She ate ravenously while Owen sat across from her, nursing his coffee in silence. Thank you, she said finally, setting down her spoon. I haven't eaten since yesterday, Owen nodded. Would you like to tell me what happened? Only if you want to, of course. The kindness in his voice broke something inside her. Words spilled out about the fire that had claimed both her husband and their livelihood, about the vicious rumors that she'd been unfaithful, about the bank's foreclosure and the town turning its back on her. Her voice broke. I was never unfaithful to Jacob. Thomas Blackwell started those rumors after Jacob refused to sell him the store location, and now everyone believes I drove my husband to set that fire. Owen listened without interruption, his face betraying no judgment. I believe you, Mrs. Parker, he said when she finished. And you're welcome to stay here until you decide what to do next. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. This ranch is too big for one person anyway, and I could use help getting it ready for the cattle arriving next month. He smiled slightly. Of course, I understand if you'd rather move on to someplace like Denver. Hannah considered his offer. She had nowhere else to go, very little money, and the thought of starting over in a big city terrified her. I can cook and clean, she said finally, and I know how to keep accounts. Jacob taught me. Then it's settled. You'll stay as my housekeeper until you decide otherwise. I'll pay you fair wages. Owen stood up. The bedroom's through there. I'll take the small room off the kitchen. As Hannah followed his directions to the bedroom, exhaustion washed over her again. The bed was simply made with clean linens, and she sank onto it gratefully. For the first time since the fire, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps here, away from the judgmental eyes of Whiterock, she could begin to rebuild her life. The following weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Hannah threw herself into bringing the neglected ranch house back to life, scrubbing floors, washing curtains, and organizing the kitchen. Owen spent his days repairing fences and outbuildings, preparing for the cattle herd he'd purchased. They shared meals together, their initial awkwardness gradually giving way to comfortable conversation. Hannah learned that Owen had grown up in Missouri, the son of a horse trader. He'd left home at 17 after his parents died of influenza, working his way west as a ranch hand and cattle driver before saving enough for his own place. Why Colorado? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Owen contemplated the view before answering. I passed through here once, maybe 6 years ago. Something about these mountains stayed with me. I promised myself I'd come back someday with enough money to put down roots. Hannah understood that feeling. She and Jacob had chosen Whiterock for similar reasons, enchanted by the beauty of the landscape and the promise of a fresh start. The memory of her husband brought a familiar pang of sadness, but surprisingly, it didn't overwhelm her as it once had. What about you? Owen asked. Will you stay in Colorado? Hannah sighed, watching a hawk circle lazily in the distance. I don't know. White Rock was supposed to be our beginning. Now it feels like I need to go somewhere completely new. Owen nodded, respecting her uncertainty. No rush to decide. You're earning your keep and then some. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Hannah was kneading dough for bread when she heard horses approaching. Peering through the window, her heart froze. Sheriff Mills from White Rock, accompanied by Thomas Blackwell, the very man who'd spread rumors about her. Owen met them in the yard, his stance protective as he greeted the men. Hannah wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside, determined to face whatever had brought them here. Mrs. Parker, Sheriff Mills nodded curtly. We've been looking for you. Why? Owen asked before she could respond. Has Mrs. Parker committed some crime? Thomas Blackwell sneered. Besides abandoning her husband's debts, there are questions about the fire, Tucker. Convenient that she wasn't home when it started. Hannah's face flushed with anger. I was delivering a package to Mrs. Henderson across town. Everyone knows that. Sheriff Mills cleared his throat uncomfortably. There's been talk, Mrs. Parker. The investigation isn't closed. Owen stepped forward. Mrs. Parker works for me now, Sheriff. She's not hiding. If you have actual charges, state them. Otherwise, you're trespassing on private property. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. No charges at present, but the bank is looking for her regarding Jacob's outstanding loans. I've hired an attorney in Denver, Owen replied smoothly. He'll be reviewing all claims against Mrs. Parker's late husband's estate. You can direct the bank to contact him. He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it up to the sheriff. Hannah stared at Owen in shock. He'd done no such thing, at least not that she knew of. The sheriff examined the card and nodded reluctantly. Very well, we'll be on our way. He tipped his hat and turned his horse. Thomas Blackwell lingered, his eyes cold. You found yourself a protector quickly, Hannah. Just confirms what everyone already believed. Owen's hand moved to his holster. That's enough, Blackwell. Get off my land. After they departed, Hannah turned to Owen. You hired an attorney. He shrugged. I telegraphed a lawyer friend in Denver yesterday. Figured you might need legal help sorting through everything. At her surprised expression, he added, I hope that wasn't overstepping. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. No one stood up for me like that since Jacob died. Thank you. Owen looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. It's what neighbors do. But they both knew it was more than that. As spring blossomed into summer, the ranch transformed under their combined efforts. Owen's cattle arrived 60 head of sturdy Herefords that would form the foundation of his breeding stock. Hannah surprised herself by learning to help with the livestock, finding unexpected satisfaction in the physical work that left her too tired to dwell on the past. News from town trickled in. The lawyer Owen had contacted successfully negotiated with the bank, using Hannah's widow status to reduce Jacob's debts to a manageable sum that Owen quietly paid. The investigation into the fire had been officially closed, ruled an accident caused by a faulty stove. Thomas Blackwell had mysteriously withdrawn his accusations after the lawyer began asking pointed questions about his interest in acquiring the burned property. Hannah found herself smiling more, laughing at Owen's dry humor, and looking forward to their evenings together. She noticed small things, the way he always made sure she had coffee in the morning before he left for work. How he remembered her mentioning that wildflowers were her favorite and occasionally brought a small bunch home. The gentleness in his hands when he helped her down from the wagon. One afternoon in late July, Hannah was hanging laundry when she spotted riders approaching, not lawmen this time, but a middle-aged couple she recognized as the Millers from a neighboring ranch. Mrs. Miller embraced Hannah warmly. We've been meaning to visit for ages. Owen mentioned at the general store that you were keeping house for him. He did. Hannah was surprised Owen had spoken of her in town. Oh yes, Mrs. Miller continued. He's quite proud of how you've transformed this place, says he couldn't manage without you. Mr. Miller laughed. Never thought I'd see Owen Tucker settling down. That man's been a drifter longer than I can remember. Hannah felt her cheeks warm. "We have a business arrangement, that's all." Mrs. Miller gave her a knowing look but didn't press the issue. "We're having a social gathering next Saturday, sort of an end-of-summer celebration. You and Owen must come." After they left, Hannah pondered their assumption that she and Owen were more than employer and employee. Had he given that impression in town? The thought both unsettled and thrilled her. That evening, she mentioned the invitation casually over dinner. "The Millers stopped by. They've invited us to a gathering on Saturday." Owen looked up from his plate. "Both of us?" "Yes, Mrs. Miller was quite insistent," he nodded slowly. "Would you like to go?" "I know you've been avoiding social situations." Hannah hadn't realized he'd noticed her reluctance to venture into town or neighboring ranches. "I think, yes, it might be nice to meet people who don't know me only as the widow Parker," Owen smiled. "Then we'll go." The night of the social, Hannah found herself uncharacteristically nervous as she dressed in her best gown, a simple blue dress that had thankfully been stored in the Caldwell house rather than lost in the fire. She pinned her hair up and even used a touch of rose water she'd been saving. When she emerged from her room, Owen was waiting by the fireplace, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his usually unruly dark hair combed neatly. He stared at her for a moment before finding his voice. "You look beautiful, Hannah." The sincerity in his voice made her flush. "Thank you." "You clean up nicely yourself." The Miller ranch was already bustling with neighbors when they arrived. Lanterns hung from trees, illuminating tables laden with food. A small group of musicians played lively tunes, and several couples danced in a cleared area near the barn. Hannah felt eyes on her as Owen helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering at her waist. She recognized the curiosity in their gazes, but was surprised to find no judgment there. These were ranching families who kept to themselves, with little interest in White Rock gossip. Mrs. Miller welcomed them enthusiastically, introducing Hannah to everyone as Owen Tucker's housekeeper from back east, embellishing her backstory in a way that made Hannah smile gratefully. No mention of widowhood or scandal. As the evening progressed, Hannah found herself genuinely enjoying the company. She spoke with ranchers' wives about recipes and gardening, laughed at stories about cattle drives gone wrong, and watched children chase fireflies in the gathering darkness. Owen stayed close, his presence reassuring without being possessive. When the musicians began a waltz, he turned to her. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Parker?" Hannah hesitated. She hadn't danced since before Jacob's death. "I'm not sure I remember how." "Neither do I," he admitted with a smile. "We can remind each other." His hand was warm against the small of her back as he led her to the dancing area. They moved awkwardly at first, finding their rhythm gradually until they were gliding among the other couples. Hannah couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so light, so free from the weight of grief and shame that had become her constant companions. "Thank you," she said softly, looking up at him, "for the dance, for everything. For climbing up to that hayloft and offering me your bed. For believing me when no one else would, for giving me a place to heal." Owen's eyes darkened with emotion. "Hannah, whatever he intended to say was interrupted as the music ended and people applauded. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing all summer. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought beneath the canopy of stars. When they reached the ranch, Owen helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. "I had a wonderful time," Hannah said, breaking the silence, "as did I." Owen seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke. "Hannah, I want you to know that you're free to leave whenever you wish. I don't want you to stay out of gratitude or because you feel you have no other options." His words stung unexpectedly. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said quickly. "God, no, but I need you to know that you can. That you're not obligated to me." Hannah understood then. He was giving her freedom, ensuring she didn't feel trapped by circumstance as she had in White Rock. "I stay because I want to, Owen. This place being here with you, it's become home." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Owen took a step closer, his hand gently touching her cheek. "I never expected to find you in that hayloft." "I never expected you to climb up and find me," she whispered. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. His lips were gentle against hers, asking rather than demanding, and Hannah found herself responding with a passion she'd thought died alongside her husband. They broke apart, both breathless. Owen pressed his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Hannah Parker. Have been since I found you sleeping in my hay." Tears pricked her eyes. "I've been afraid to admit how I feel, afraid of what people would think a widow finding happiness so soon after losing her husband." "What do you feel?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That I'm falling in love with you too. That somehow, in the midst of the worst time in my life, I found something beautiful and unexpected." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her against him. When they finally parted, Owen took her hand and led her toward the house, toward their shared future. The following spring found the Tucker ranch thriving. The cattle herd had grown, and the first calves of the season dotted the pastures. Hannah stood on the porch, watching as Owen mended a fence in the distance. His movements confident and strong, her hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, evidence of the child that would arrive by winter. Their wedding the previous autumn had been a simple affair at the Miller Ranch, attended by neighboring families who had become friends. No one from White Rock had been invited, though Hannah had heard through Mrs. Miller that the town's attitude had softened as the truth about the fire and Thomas Blackwell's scheming had gradually come to light. Owen spotted her watching and raised his hand in greeting. She waved back, smiling as he abandoned his work and started walking toward the house. Some days, she still marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just 1 year, from desperate widow hiding in a hayloft to beloved wife with a home and future stretching before her. As Owen reached the porch, he pulled her into his arms, his hand covering hers over their growing child. "What has you looking so thoughtful this morning?" Hannah leaned into his embrace. "I was just thinking about that night in the hayloft, how close I came to leaving before you found me." "I thank God every day that you stayed," he said, kissing her forehead. "Though I'm glad you're in a proper bed now instead of sleeping on hay." "Your bed," she reminded him with a smile. "You offered me your bed. Best offer I ever made," Owen replied, his eyes crinkling with happiness. "Though now I prefer to share it." Hannah laughed and pulled him down for a proper kiss. Behind them, the ranch stretched out, a testament to what they had built together from the ashes of her past. The shame that had once defined her had been replaced by love, strength, and the promise of new beginnings. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Owen's arm around her shoulders and her head resting against him, Hannah felt a profound sense of peace. The road that had led her to that hayloft had been paved with heartbreak, but it had ultimately guided her home to this land, this man, this life they were creating together. "Are you happy?" Owen asked softly, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her shoulder. Hannah looked up at him, at the face that had become as necessary to her as breathing. "More than I ever thought possible." As darkness settled over the Colorado wilderness, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across black velvet, Hannah Parker Tucker knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unlikely places, even a hayloft where a desperate widow once hid from shame, only to be found by a cowboy with an open heart and a simple offer. "You can have my bed." The future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the western sky, filled with the joys and challenges they would face together, no longer alone, no longer hiding, but standing proudly in the life they had built from the ruins of what came before.